Hello, this is Keith All and welcome back. Today's tutorial is going to be how we can extract data from our pivot tables in Excel. And how we could do that is through a function called GETPIVOTDATA function. And we're going to discuss the syntax and how it all works. And then I'm going to give you some examples on how we could extract the data that we want. And over here, actually, here on the left-hand side is our data set, and over on the right, you'll see the questions that we're going to be asking shortly on how to extract this data from our pivot tables. And this spreadsheet will be available for you in the description below. But anyways, let's first discuss this over here. These are the questions that we're going to extract and get these answers from our pivot tables that we set up. So let's go over to the syntax tab and let's understand what GetPivotData is. And what, as you can see on the screen, it's a function in Excel that is a powerful way to extract specific values from your pivot table using field and item names rather than actual cell references. So we're going to go over what these are. Down below is the syntax. So get pivot table, and then the first argument is our data field. Our data field here, as you can see, it's required, and it's the name of the value field that you want to retrieve. In other words, when you build out a pivot table in Excel, you have to drag certain fields from your data set into the values area that we want to get information about. So in this particular case, I have a sample pivot table over here, and it's just basically I'm grouping region and customer tier, and then we're getting this total sales for that combination. So when it says data field, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be grabbing the sales figure, because what we want to do in this particular case, we want to get the total sales for the South region and the silver tier within that. So over here to the right, I already did a get pivot table function, as you can see up in the formula bar. So our first argument is the sales. In other words, this is the value that we want to extract from here. So that's the argument number one. Argument number two is called pivot table. Basically, it's a reference to wherever your pivot table is. So in other words, if you look up at the formula bar, I have an absolute reference of G4. So if we go over G column and row 4, that's the beginning of our pivot table that we want to extract data from. Our next argument is it's a combination of field and item numbers. So in our example here, we want to get to the South region. So our first pair is our field name is going to go over to the region column, okay? And then we want to scroll down until we get to the South item within that region column. So over here to the left, it says it's a pair that filters out the data. Field number 1 is the name of the row or column. So in this case, it's the region column. Okay, and the item number that we want to get from that region column is going to be our South region. So we're going to be able to go to the region down to the South area. Okay, our next pair of field and item pairs is the same thing. We want to grab the silver tier for the South region. So our field 1 for the second pair of field and item pair is going to be our customer tier column, and then the item under customer tier is going to be silver. So so that's how we come up with 375,005. That's this value right here in this pivot table. Okay, so now let's go over to our pivot table examples and let's answer all these questions right here, basically. So I already inserted a pivot table, so let's click inside the pivot table. And if our field list is missing, as long as your pivot table is selected, go up to pivot table analyze and click on a field list. Okay, so basically what I did was I inserted a pivot table from our data set, and I put the region in the rows area and the sales in the values area. Okay, and by default, Excel just sums up the values in that numeric column. So basically, we're getting total sales per region, and of course, we have a grand total here. So what we want to do is use the getPivotTable function to grab the sales, the total sales for the West region. So how do we do that? And as you can see, it's going to be very simple to do. All you have to do is type in equal and then click into your pivot table of the value that you want. So we want it for the West region. So all I do, and watch what happens up in the formula bar as I click here. It automatically builds out your your get pivot data function for you, puts the values in there. Now press enter and look what happens. We extracted the West region value and put it over here. So let's format this. Let's right click on the sales figure. You want to select number format. And by doing so, you automatically get the format for every value in this column right here. Instead of just a cell that you selected, it automatically formats the entire column for you. Okay, now our second question that we want to answer, we want to get the total units sold by category for the laptops category. So an easy way to do this, let's select our pivot table here. There's multiple ways, and I'll show you other ways too. Control C, and then let's go over here and let's Control V, copy that pivot table, and let's just change what this pivot table brings out. So what we want to do is we want to get the total units by category. Okay, so let's uncheck this. Let's we want to get the total units sold, so we want to sum this up for not by region but by category. So let's uncheck region and let's click category, and Excel automatically knows that we want to put the category into the rows. Okay, so now this pivot table is telling us that we summed up the total units sold for each category, okay, in our data set. So let's format this, right click, let's choose number format, and we just want it to be number, and then no decimal places, use the 1000 separator, click OK. Okay, so how do we get to units sold by category for laptops? Again, very simple, equal, and then let's click into our pivot table, okay, for the category over here. This is the category, and then we want the laptops. And then press enter, and it automatically does that for us. Let's go back up here. Let's revisit these parameters. Remember what each parameter is. So if we go back here, we got the data field, pivot table, and a combination of field and item pairs. So data field over here, okay, our data field is the unit sold because we want the unit sold. This is the unit sold here, column, okay. Now the second parameter is our pivot table parameter. What pivot table do we want to extract data from? So our pivot table exists or starts in cell A11. Now the next two parameters are the combination of field and item pairs. So our field is we want to get the category. So we come over here, we get the category, that's the field. The item number for the category is going to be laptops. So that's how you get that. So now let's figure out sales by tier and region. So we're going to have two sets of field and item pairs here that we're going to be building out. So what we want to do is, again, let's select our pivot table. An easy way to do this is copying an existing one and then just modifying what you want to display. So another way to select a pivot table is select an existing pivot table, any cell within it. You get this pivot table analyze menu or ribbon item up here, and we want to select it. So we go over here, click on that, and we want to select the entire pivot table. Control C, and then Control V. Let's press Escape. Now let's change this, what we're displaying here. We want to get the total sales by tier and region. So in other words, let's bring sales back into the values area. Let's get rid of units sold. Okay. We want to get by region and tier. So we want to get region back into the rows. Let's get rid of category. And we want to get the customer tier. Okay. So now let's go back over here and let's modify the report layout. Right now it's in compact form. So let's select anywhere in the pivot table. We want to go up to design and report layout. And what we want to do is get it into tabular form. Okay. So let's do some modifications here. Let's get rid of these minus buttons, plus and minus buttons here. Go up to here, pivot table, analyze, and over here in the show group, let's just click on that. It gets rid of that. Now let's format these numbers here. These are the sum of sales, and we could do that by right-clicking, number format. We want currency, no decimals. Click OK. Okay. Now let's answer this by get pivot table function. So we want to do equal. Now let's click in here what we want to extract. Remember, sales by region and tier. So we want to get the East region. So this is the East region here. And we want to get the gold tier, which is here. Now press enter. And as you can see, it gets that value directly from there. It's easy to implement this get pivot table function without you really understanding how it works. All you have to do is enter an equal sign and click somewhere within your pivot table, and it'll extract the information that you want. Now this one's a little bit different. We want to get the average order value. Okay. So let's figure out how we can do this first. So let's copy a pivot table. Control C, let's go up here. Control V, escape. Let's do the first value. We want to get the average order value. So in other words, we want to get the average of their sales, okay, for each order. So let's do this. We want to get the order ID, so sales per order ID. Order ID in this particular case is a unique order ID in our data set. So we want to bring this over to the rows. We click on that and it puts it into the rows, but let's get rid of the category. Okay. And now instead of sum of units sold, we want the sum of sales. Let's click on sales and it brings it over to the values area. But we want to get rid of units sold. Let's uncheck that. So now this is the sum of sales. So in other words, we're going to get, it sums up all the sales for this order ID, and it does that for every unique order ID in our data set. But we want the average. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to change the value field settings to this. Instead of summing it, we want the average. Let's click OK. Okay, now what we want to do, we have to add in another column in here. And in other words, that we want to be able to get how many orders or how many line items occurred for this particular order ID. And in order to do that, so what we need to do is add order ID in the value areas a second time. So we do that by, we click on order ID. Let's drag it down below here to the, all right. And what this tells us is, because there was only one line item per order ID, that's why we get a count of 1 for each and every one of these. If our data set included or had, let's say, 3 line items for an order ID, then this count for this order ID would go up to 3. Okay, so at this point now, we want to be able to get the average order value. So in other words, to calculate that, we got to take sales and divide it by the count of order ID to get the average order value. How do we do this? Let's do click. Let's equal. We want to be able to get the average order value. So we scroll down here all the way down to the bottom, and we want to click on that. Now we want to be able to divide that by the total number of orders, equal that, and then press enter. Now let's scroll back up here, and so in this case we got 6, but I'm thinking this is incorrect, so I have to see what I did here. And I think I know what I did. So let's go back over to the pivot table. And then let's change this back from average sales just to the sum of sales. Okay. And then click OK. And then, so now it changes it back correctly. So in other words, the average sales per order is going to be the total of sales altogether for the data set, divided by the count of the number of order IDs, or, and again, if there was 3 items in a particular order, then this would change to 3 and it will automatically calculate that. But if we go back over here, control down arrow, we have 1,000 orders because there's 1,000 rows in our data set. So that's how we come up with an average order value of 55.95. Okay. Now let's see how this works with a dynamic cell. In other words, whenever I change over here to the right, I created a drop-down list of just the unique regions, and I'm gonna select it. So how can that work with our GetPivotData function? So we could do that. So in other words, whenever I select this, it'll dynamically update this. So let's first build this out easily. I'm just going to grab the first pivot table up here, and I'm just going to randomly select the South region, press enter. Okay. So let's go back to our formula, and we need to change it so this item, this value changes by what we select over here. So we have to go over here. Let's do that, and just click this out and press enter. And now you could see that this is a dynamic cell reference in this particular case. In other words, we want to get the South region sales from this pivot table. So the South matches up with this value here. Let's go over here. Let's click the East, see how it automatically updated. So we got 1.479 million, and that's what we got here. So that's how we could extract values from our pivot tables using the get pivot data function within Excel. Hopefully I explained some things clearly to you, and sorry for misrepresenting initially about the average order value, but we corrected it. Again, this data set will be made available in the description below. Remember to subscribe to my channel, and as always, please like and share this video. Thanks again for stopping by, and you have a great day.